Hey, everybody. Welcome to my show, William Wallace for America. Thank you for listening. As I always say, I am William Wallace, and with me today is Neil Mammen with Every Black Life Matters. We're going to tell his story. Although you might see from the video, he might not fit what you might think Every Black Life Matters, but he's got a story behind that. And for my Louisiana friends, his name is pronounced Mammen, but he likes to say mom and them, as we always say in Louisiana. Neil, thank you so much for being on tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, William. I appreciate being on here.
Well, I got to tell you, I'll let people know they might have watched my interview with Kevin McGarry a few weeks ago. You all are a little connected, but you all have some different platforms to talk about. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks. So the background of Every Black Life Matters actually comes from my wife, who is not black either. She's a redhead.
She's wow, okay.
And she noticed on Facebook that some of her friends, her Christian friends, our Christian friends, were going out and protesting with BLM. And so
with BLM?
With BLM. This is back in 2020. So she turned to me and she said, they don't realize that BLM stands for everything that's anti-Christian and that they're also Marxists. But they do want to make a point that they're not racist and they care about black people, right? They do care about the plight of black people. So she turned to me and she said, you need to call Kevin, because Kevin was a mutual friend and I'd known him for about 15 years or so. And she said, you need to call Kevin and ask him to start something that is the Christian alternative to BLM.
I don't think Kevin said that directly. So Every Black Life Matter isn't just an organization for black people to feel more who are more peaceful than the BLM organization. It's a Christian-based way of saying that where Every Black Life Matters on a Christian basis.
Well, it's that, and also to solve the real issues of black plight. And I'll get into that in a bit. So, but the story basically goes, I called up Kevin. I said, hey, Kevin, you really need to talk. Because Kevin is the chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. And yes, he works with Dean Nelson up in Washington, D.C. So I said, Kevin, you need to call Dean Nelson. You guys need to start an alternative to BLM. And whatever that, whatever you call it, but you got to have it on your webpage. You got to go out there and say, no, there is an alternative to BLM that cares about black people. So Kevin went off for a couple of weeks, and then I called him and I said, Kevin, what's going on? He says, well, it turns out that the Frederick Douglass Foundation is so busy doing, because it was the campaign season, they were doing a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And they were really busy getting the Republican vote, yeah, Trump. And they actually did a good job, because I think it went from 15% black to 18% blacks voted for Trump. So they actually were really instrumental in that. But he said that, Dean said they're way too busy. And Dean, who knows me, also said, you and Neil, Kevin, need to start something. So I said, Kevin, I don't know if you've noticed or looked lately, but I'm not black. And he laughed and he said, no, but you are African American. You see, I was born in Africa. I grew up in Africa. In fact, I spent my entire youth in Africa. And came to the States only when I was 18. So I was born in Ghana, and I grew up in Jamaica, Ethiopia, Sudan, Yemen, and my parents are of Indian origin. But I'm, as I like to say, I'm African by culture, Indian by ancestry. So, and American by choice. By the grace of God, I am an American, right?
And so I love that.
So we sat down together and we said, so what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to solve the real issues of black plight, because if you look at the black community, they're lower economically, they're lower, the literacy rate is lower. There's a whole bunch of issues.
Thank you, Democrat Party policies.
Exactly. And we'll talk about exactly that. And so we started looking at that and we said, okay, well, we've got to start dealing with this. And then as we were doing that, this whole thing about CRT came up, this whole issue of social justice came up. But our foundational principles are basically almost one-to-one the opposite of BLM's. So BLM is pro-choice, we are pro-life. BLM is Marxist, we're free markets, right? Because they said that they were trained Marxists. BLM is against traditional family, we're for the traditional family. BLM is against educational choice. We're for educational choice. And then BLM is for violence, and we're nonviolent. So the only thing where we see a slight synergy is that we both believe in criminal justice reform, because you and I both know that there are bad cops there, and it's very hard to get rid of the bad cops. So we believe in, and then there's one other issue of criminal justice reform we think is the biggest problem. See, the most racist man who ever lived in the last 30 years created a bill in the 1990s called the Biden crime bill. And it has been the source of, it has put so many black men in prison, and it specifically targeted blacks. But what Biden did is, if you had an ounce of cocaine as a white boy, because the white boys use cocaine powder, you would get a slap on the wrist. But if you had that ounce of cocaine, but as crack cocaine, you would get 20 years to life in prison. And now, it's only the blacks who are using crack cocaine and the whites who are using powder cocaine. And you can see the disparity and the racism in that principle. And that Biden crime bill has actually extended and put more blacks unjustly into prison for no good reason. And
is that crime bill, are the policies from the crime bill still in place today?
Many are. In 2005, they kind of backed off on some of those, but many of those still are. And there are people, I mean, again, but during the 2 decades while it was active, or the decade while it was active, a lot of people are still in prison. Nobody went back and said, oh, we're going to release you from this, which is something that needs to be done.
I mean, let's not forget Biden also said he didn't want his children going in schools with a racial jungle.
Yeah, so he didn't want his kids growing up in a racial jungle, right? So, but then we started looking at all this, and we said, so that's where we have criminal justice reform, right? So, but we started looking at all this, and we realized that, and this is, I just recently wrote an article saying that the Republican Party needs to change its tactics when it comes to African Americans. The Republican Party has been playing defense the whole time, and they really need to go on the offense, because there is one party that's been the most racist party of all time. This is the party that actually put blacks in the place they are. So let me go back to the 1930s. In the 1930s, at the height of racism, right, black men were doing really well. In fact, they were doing economically well. That's right. And black parents, the fatherless rate in the black community was probably 20%, 22%, right? And then we go forward, we fast forward a bunch of things. I'll go back to the 1930s and 1950s in a little bit. But in 1970, Lyndon Johnson realized he was not going to win the presidency against Barry Goldwater unless he got the blacks to vote for him. And until the 1970s, blacks would never vote for Democrats, because Democrats were the party of slavery, Democrats were the party of racists, Democrats were the party of KKK. They're still the party of the racists, as I'm going to show to you in just a minute. And so what he did is he decided to, he brought in his whole welfare society and stuff like that. And he started to...
Where he took fathers out of homes?
Yes. And let's look at this purposely. It was the Democrat Party. Lyndon Johnson sent 100,000 social workers into black homes to remove fathers. And this is how it went. In fact, I've talked to people personally who said that the social worker would come to her mom and argue with her mom, saying, because her dad wasn't making that much money, she said, kick that bum out of the house and I will get you 3 times more money per child. And then she said, and then her aunt, the social worker, called her aunt up and says, I'm coming there in an hour, at least hide your husband's shoes and his jacket so that when I can come, I can say there's no father in the home.
There's another radio show host I talked to. Her name is Lorraine Lamont, and she tells this story because she grew up in Michigan with those scenarios where the counselor would come over, and she talks about how they would the man who would be living in the house was always referred to as Mr. Lucky, and they would say Mr. Lucky's got to leave because the counselor's on the way. But
right.
Yeah.
So what are they doing? They're separating fathers from kids. And what does this do? And this was planned. How do you make a group of people so dependent on your handouts that they can never get out of poverty? Well, what you do is you remove the father from the home. So this is exactly what happened. They knew it was going to happen, and they've seen it happen in other cultures and other societies. And so this is all planned. So they said, okay, here's where we're going. We're going to move the fathers out of the house. Now, what happens when you move fathers out of the house? The young boys don't have the discipline they need, and they become violent, and they start looking for that male leadership. And where do they find it? They find it in gangs. And so as a result, the gang population started growing, and fatherlessness was 22% before Lyndon Johnson did that. Today, it is 74%. That means 74% of all black kids grow up in a house with no father in the home, right? Because the
And
mother,
the black community actually had a higher entrepreneurial rate and a
yes,
lower divorce rate than the white family did.
exactly, until this all happened, right? And
Right.
so you can see the insidiousness of this all, right? There's just insidiousness of it all, because they're going in, they're doing this. Now, the other thing that happens is, because the young girls are also looking for their male approval, they start getting sexually active at a younger age. They're looking for that father figure, quote unquote, the male figure in their life. And you see that also. So you see the women getting sexually active, you see the young boys getting into gangs. Now, what happens when the young boys get into gangs? The crime rate goes up in that community. And as a result, the crime goes growing out. To the African Americans are 13% of the population, but they are responsible for almost 53% of all homicides.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're not killing white people, they're killing other black people. It's gang warfare, right?
Exactly.
They're fighting each other. It's the drugs and gangs. Well, guess what happens to this gang warfare drugs? They all start sliding into the public schools. So what happens to the public school? They are not teaching how to read and write anymore. They're teaching survival in a sense, and they don't have time to teach reading and writing. Now, did you know let's go back to the 1930s for a sec. Back in the 1930s, the literacy rate amongst blacks was 70%, 70%.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the literacy rate in inner cities is 17%, 17%.
Unbelievable.
Right? So now they're coming out of schools, and you're saying, well, how do we solve that? Well, here's the easy way to solve it. Every time we've had school vouchers, in fact, almost 80% of all black parents want a school voucher program so they can take their kids out of that gang-infested, drug-infested inner city school and put them in a private school. And every time that has been done, the blacks have done economically well and have been matched with the whites.
Well, before the new Lyndon Baines Johnson's New Deal, I've also heard that the statistic was that black children did equally well on standardized testing as white children
did. Absolutely. They did, because, and in fact, if you put a black kid in a school in Cupertino in the Silicon Valley, he does just as well as a white kid, right? Because there's no difference. Now, they never do as well as the Chinese and the Indians, because their parents are really strict on schooling.
Here we go. Okay. Bringing up more stereotypes.
I know, but it's true, right? It really is. But here's the other thing. They don't do as well. Now, people say, well, it's all because of racism that blacks are where they are, because blacks make the least amount of money if you look at the median income. So at the top of that scale is Indians. Indians make the most amount of money in America. Well, Indians are not white the last you looked. So it's not racism. Right? And then the second highest group of earners are Taiwanese. Now, Taiwanese are not white either.
Okay.
Right? But now, if you go down, then you'll get some Croatians and you'll get a few people. But then coming in 6th and 7th are Nigerians and Ghanaians. And they are blacker than most African Americans. The people I grew up with are so black, right?
Right, exactly.
So is it racism if the Nigerians and the Ghanaians are making more money than the average white? And then you go down and finally you get to the median income of the white person, right?
So does this include the wealthiest people in America? Because I know that like when you look at the wealthiest people in America, most of them are white last time I checked.
No,
you're just looking at the social economic scale of
it's just talking salaries. It's just talking salaries. Because remember, the wealthiest people don't make money on paychecks.
Okay.
They make money on business and investment and stock, right?
Right.
So it actually works out really well. It shows you that who's making. Now, the joke really is, you know what a disgraceful Nigerian person is? It's someone who only has one PhD. Same in our family. All the kids in the family in our family have master's degrees, right? And my dad has like 3 degrees and a PhD and all that. And so my mom, she was the only one with a master's degree. She said, I got to get a master's degree just to keep up with my kids. So she got a master's degree, right? So you can see there's this thing about getting degrees that you come from immigrants from other country. They come here and they say, hey, this is the country of opportunity. Education is going to help us. Now, understand, when I say PhD, this is not PhD in underwater basket weaving or lesbian studies. these are PhDs in law, or not law, in like physics or mathematics or things like that, stuff that you can go out and a lot of them are doctors and lawyers and stuff. So this is stuff that really brings in the money. Because when I remember when I was talking to my brother, he wanted to come to America, and he said, I want to do art. I said, if you want to do art, music, I said, you want to do music, stay in India. I'm not paying for you to come here for you.
I'm not paying you to come over here on that, right?
Engineering, if you want to do electrical engineering, then you can come here and I'll pay for it. And he does really well, right? now I'm like, good luck with that music degree. And now, of course, he has like 20 guitars because he can buy all the musical equipment he wants, right? And he's also produced an album and all that, but that's on the side. But coming back to this issue, so what's happening here is that it's not a question of racism. So go back to the 1930s, literacy rate is 30%. Today, the literacy rate is 17%. Now, back in the but here's the problem. So now these kids graduate with a 17% literacy rate. That means they can't read or write effectively enough to be able to do the stock check or ordering new stock or filling in the backlog or doing accounting. They don't have that skill set because they can't read or write. So now we get this issue of the minimum wage. So these kids come out, they can't read or write. Nobody's going to hire them for $15 an hour. And so naturally, they're unable to create any wealth. And so they're stuck there. So let's go back to the minimum wage. Not many people know this. The minimum wage was created by racists. Let's go back to the 1930s.
This is news to me. I'm eager. I'm all ears.
Back in the 1930s, the blacks were doing really well. Height of Jim Crow laws and racism, right? The blacks are doing really well financially. Why? Because let's say you have a construction company owner and he's a racist, right? Let's say somewhere in the South, he's a racist. He does not like black people. But this black man comes to him and says, I will work for half the salary of a white man. And the guy says, well, hey, that's more money for me. And then the next guy, he says, do you have any friends who will work for me? So the blacks were doing the job for half the salary, and they were learning these skills. They were taking it back to their community. They were starting their own company. And what happens when you start acquiring skills? You end up being really good at what you're doing. And then other people say, hey, I want that guy. He's far better than this guy. So the demand went up for their services. They would really,
and he works cheaper.
And they were cheaper. So naturally, the economy booms in the black communities. So a group of people, otherwise known as the Democrat Party, decided they had to stop this from happening. And the racists and the KKK said, well, the only way we can stop this is we have to come up with a minimum wage. And that is the origin of the minimum wage. Go back and look at the law.
You're saying the minimum wage was kind of like, what's the term I'm looking for, where instead of raising people up, it says, oh, no, here's a place where everybody, instead of having equality, it had equity. Equity meaning
you could call it that,
equal, but in a reverse effect is what I'm getting to.
Yeah, but what would happen now is when you went to this white racist construction owner and said, I'll work for half, he says, I can't hire you anymore. I have to pay you this minimum wage. And besides, I don't like black people anyway, because I'm a racist, so I'm not going to hire you. And the economy in the black communities tanked as a result of that. Because why hire a black person when you've got to pay the same price to a white person? And this is what they designed it for. That minimum wage was designed.
And like I made my point a minute ago, was it's an argument of equality versus equity.
Right.
Where equality is where everybody has equal opportunity. Equity, everybody has equal results.
Yep.
And minimum wage is basically that. It's equal results. So these, like you said, these businessmen back then, they said, well, hey, you might be working for less than this white guy or this other person, but now that I only have to pay everybody the same price, I can hire anybody I want.
Exactly.
Because everybody has to work at the same price.
Exactly. So the minimum wage was set at exactly what a white person would ask for that job. And it eliminated a lot of black people from the job. So that's where the minimum wage originates from. So now we fast forward to today's day and age, and the minimum wage effectively, as Thomas Sowell, a black economist, as you know, said, the minimum wage effectively for black kids is zero, because that's how much they will get paid. I've started 4 startup companies, right?
How does he say it's effectively zero?
Because nobody's hiring those black kids for $15 an hour.
Okay.
So they're getting zero.
Right. Whereas if they are, and so basically if they don't have the skill set to be hired at $15 an hour, which is what you're saying, they're not going to get hired at all. But if the
And they'll
minimum
never.
wage was where it is now, say $4, $5, $6 an hour, they'd have a chance at getting hired and work their way up to the $15 an hour.
Exactly. There should be no minimum wage. Let me give you an example. As I said, I started 4 startup companies. Now, whenever I started a startup company, we never had money for the first few months, right? First few years, sometimes we would just have an idea. We're working on it, and those of us who had a good salary before could work for free, but we didn't have so we started this one big company, and we were designing a networking product, and we had nobody to do our IT.
Okay.
So I went into a high school church ministry group. It was a church group. And I said, hey, I need some guys just to pull wires and to connect computers and do all our IT for us. And they said, great. How much will you pay us? I said, nothing. I'll pay you pizza at the end of the day. Right? You come in for a few hours, I'll buy you pizza. Right?
Right.
So they came and they said, yeah, sure, we can do that. And why? Because they wanted that experience. I couldn't afford to pay them, and they wanted experience. Well, then we got funded. Right? We got money. And we were like, okay, we'll pay you a little bit of money. Well, then a number of these guys said, hey, the guy in the company next door said they'd pay us like more money. And we said, oh, no, we'll match it.
Yeah, right.
So right. Working for us. And then one of them said, hey, I got a job as a full-time employee. And we said, oh, we'll match that. Right? Because he had all this experience.
Right.
But he'd gotten it for free. And then I just want to tell you where this leads. A few months ago, I saw on LinkedIn that this guy had become the CIO of a major university, the chief information officer of a major university. And I texted him, I messaged him, I said, hey, congratulations. And he said, I want you to remember that I used to work for you for pizza for free. You were a slave manager. I said, yes, that's right. He says, I want to thank you so much for that, because if it wasn't for that, I would not be here today.
You know, it's funny. Here, you're reminding me of a story that I haven't told, and I'm going to tell you, Neil. You're reminding me of a story I haven't told in almost forever, and I don't know if many people know this story. When I first started my first business, actually not my first business, but my second business, which kind of was my first official business, really. One of I think my second or third job that I ever did, I got paid with a pizza.
There you go.
and that business has turned into a 35-year-old construction company that I still have today. And my second or third job was for pizza. It was, I'll pay you. They literally gave me a gift certificate at, I think, Godfather's Pizza, for me to take family or friends or whatever. So, but back to your story.
Yeah, but that's exactly the way that these things need to work, right? You come in and we'll pay you what we think you're worth, whatever it is, and you move up and you move up, you learn more skills, and eventually you can do this. So again, minimum wage stifles and hurts the Black community. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is how there are 44 million African Americans today. There should have been 64 million. 20 million, that's almost half of them, were killed in the womb. That's 50% of African Americans. That's a Black genocide. In fact, Jesse Jackson, when he was still pro-choice in the 80s, he's the one who came up with the word. He says it's a Black genocide. It turns out that almost 79%, actually almost 80%, 79%.
You mean when he was still pro-life? You said when he was still pro-choice.
Pardon me? No, when he was still pro-life.
Oh, yeah. You said pro-choice.
Jesse Jackson was pro-life in the 80s.
Okay.
And then when he tried to run for president, they said to him, well, you can't run for president unless you're pro-choice. We're not going to help you in the Democrat Party. Suddenly, overnight, he lost his zeal for life and became pro-choice.
But isn't that amazing that somebody, a Black man that used to be pro-life, that realizes what Margaret Sanger said,
right?
Took power or the pursuit of power over the people of his own color, and was basically, a Benedict Arnold, to his own people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That a traitor to his own people. And to your point, that I had learned a while back was that the Black population was on track to become the largest percentage of race in the country.
Yeah.
But once the Margaret Sanger came in and said they're the weeds of society and
Yep.
installed
Yep.
Planned Parenthood. That's now why they're the
Yeah.
a minority still.
So even though blacks are only 13% of the population, 79% of all Planned Parenthoods and abortion clinics are in black communities or within walking distance of them. And it's funded by us, by our tax dollars. Billions of dollars are going to kill blacks. And so I say to people, I don't care if you're pro-life or pro-choice. This has got to be a problem for you. It's a black genocide. Do you not care about black people? And if you don't care about black people, then you're the racist, not me. And guess who's doing all that? I mean, you can go down the line. Every one of these I've told you about is all the Democrat Party. And so in my article, I say the Republican Party needs to turn around and start telling the Democrat Party, you are the racist. You're the guys who've been racist from the beginning. You're the one who are killing blacks. You're the one who won't give them vouchers. You're the ones who won't let them get jobs. You're the ones who won't let them educated. And you're the ones who won't let them keep a father in the home. So what we're proposing for the fatherlessness problem is we're saying, now, for years, for decades, they've been incentivized you to kick the father out. How about we turn that around?
I love it. I've been saying this for a long time.
Yeah.
Neil, I
If
love
there's
it.
a father in the home that's genetically related and is married, and you have to get married to the mother in the home, then you get more money.
That's exactly what I've been saying. Have you been listening to my shows, Neil?
I should be.
I've been saying this for the longest time. I said the problem with the Democrat policies for so long has been that they've found ways to get the minority communities. And look, it's not just black people, Neil.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when you go across the poor areas of our country, it's actually more white people that are on welfare.
Yep,
But the
yep.
problem is the black communities are the one that have the negative population,
Yeah.
growth as a result, because you couple Planned Parenthood with that. But it's like I've always said is, the problem with these government programs are they're designed to get people attached to them or addicted to them like crack.
Yep.
And then what happens is once they're on it, they can't get off. And the people who want to get off of it can't, because you can only make a certain amount of money
Yep.
when you're on these government programs. You can't have a father in the home. Well, if we started putting a bridge to get people from these programs to a more prosperous life, you do that like you're saying, hey, look, if you have a father in the home, you're going to get more money. If you have a father in the home, maybe you attach an education program to it where you can go get a free education, or you can get a trade school,
Right.
a trade school grant, or a trade school degree, paid for by the government, where you're able to get in there and be able to get people bridges to get off of these programs. And you do that through changing the rules and regulations. And now you not only help the black community, you help poor communities, you
Yep.
help everyone, because when you change those rules, it helps not just the black community, but everybody. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something in the, since I've had 4 startups and raised money before, in the startup industry, we know there's 3 kinds of money, right? There is neutral money. That's like from a bank. They just give you money and they get some stock. That's neutral money.
Everybody gets a
Doesn't help
dollar.
you.
Everybody gets a dollar.
Right. Then there's good money. Good money is when you get funding from a venture capitalist who owns another company that is going to be the customer of yours. That's good money because he wants you to be successful and he wants his other company to be successful. So now that's very good money because you already have a built-in company you'll have a built-in customer, in fact. And the VC is going to now insist that the other venture capitalist now uses you as a client, as a source, right? So that's good money. And then there's bad money. Bad money is when a VC invests money in you to slow you down and kill you because they have an investment in another company that is better, that they think that is competing with you, and so they give you bad money, right? And then they start manipulating you and hurting you. And this is exactly what's happening in the African American community. The Democrats are giving you bad money to control you and keep you dependent on them.
That's right.
And that's exactly what's been happening. And so I'm saying that the Republican Party needs to start calling out the Democrats to be the racists and show that how we have actual solutions and that we can actually solve the problems for them, because this is not working and it's not going to work anything. And this critical race theory and everything is just going to make things worse. See, one of the things that the Marxists realized back in the 50s, in fact, back in the 30s, is that the only way they would be able to bring Marxism to America is if they destroyed 5 things. The first one is they just needed to destroy the family, which we've seen them doing, right? Because LBJ was a total socialist. He might not have been considered himself a Marxist, but he was a socialist, right? The second thing is they have to infiltrate the educational system, which they've already done. Mm-hmm. The third thing is they have to infiltrate, and that's the education system means high schools, public schools, grade schools, and colleges, right? Which they've done really effectively. The third thing is they have to infiltrate the church, which they're doing with liberation theology. You can see all these churches are letting this in. There was a movie done by a good friend of mine named Judd Saul and Trevor Loudon, both friends of mine, called Enemies Within the Church, about the infiltration of CRT and wokeness into the church, right? The fourth thing they have to destroy is they have to destroy the economy. Well, how do you destroy the economy? You make a lot of people in that community unable to earn their way. So in other words, they're actually sucking out of the economy rather than putting into the economy. Because see, we believe in the free market. We believe that anyone who's willing to come here and willing to work and willing to put into the pie, it just grows the pie bigger.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
So I'm like, yeah, come here and work. Just do it legally and we'll be happy, and don't suck things out until you actually start putting in, right? So, but the last one is they have to cause racial strife. They've got to cause a friction within the communities, so they're all disparate, they're all separate, and that's exactly what critical race theory does, and all these social justice things.
And I said this earlier. I've actually said this earlier twice already tonight. And I'll say it again with you because I've talked about CRT twice already. That it's amazing to me, and I'm glad I'm bringing this up because you're going to, I think, grasp this a little bit better, or maybe run with it. That critical race theory, the timing of it is coming up at a point in time when we went through a bunch of years now where I think Black people are really starting to realize, and not just Black people, but people that have been adhering to the Democrat Party policies, they're waking up and they're going, wait a minute, the government isn't really for us.
No.
And it's mostly, but the government isn't really for Black people. They're using these government programs to keep us under the table. They feed us scraps on the table. Yep. They control us with the narratives, and more people have been waking up to that. And now all of a sudden comes critical race theory, yet another way to divide us up on our race, when the reality is, that we're all more alike than we realize.
Well, also, and as I like to tell people, look, I've traveled the entire world. I've lived in like 11 countries.
Yeah, you're from the entire world.
I've visited as an engineer. I've flown to China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, England, France. I've traveled all over the world as an engineer, training people. And I can tell you, America is the least racist country I've ever lived in. Look at India. India has a caste system. Right?
Really? They do?
It's a really racist country. Look at Africa. There's a difference between the Arab. The Arabs hate the blacks, and the blacks, hate the Arabs. There's a racism there.
And
right?
let's not forget, to your point, that America was one of the last countries to adopt slavery, and the first one to get rid of it.
Yep.
Yet other countries, like the ones you're mentioning, still have slavery.
Yep. Like Yemen may not as much, but Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these countries still have a slavery or a form of slavery. And which brings you to my next point, which I think I want to mention here, is I wrote a book called Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church?
Well, can you give me the website where that can be found?
Yeah, JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com.
All right, finish then.
Yeah, so JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com. And here's what, in fact, we just did a flyer. You can download a flyer. It's a brochure that you can download. And what I have to make sure the brochure is on there. But if you go to vac.org, I run a group called the Values Advocacy Council, and it's called vac.org. If you go there, there's a brochure you can download to get exactly what I'm about to tell you. So basically, in that brochure, it basically summarizes my book in about 2 pages. Here's what I say. If Christians don't get involved in politics, if your pastor says you should not be involved in politics, then you and your pastor are effectively saying that you want slavery, racism, kidnapped brides, child abandonment, child prostitution, temple prostitution, killing twins superstitiously, burning widows in their husband's funeral pyre. And I go through a whole list of other things of all. You want them all to be legal. You just talked about slavery. Why is slavery illegal today? Is because Christians got involved in politics. In the case of slavery specifically, it was Pastor John Newton. Remember he wrote the song Amazing Grace? He goes and he meets up with William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson, and he says, we have got to change the law. And so Pastor John Newton gets his church involved in fighting slavery. And for 40 years in England, they fight slavery. And finally, 40 years later, they're able to politically make slavery illegal.
Who was the philosopher that said you may not be involved in politics, but politics is involved in you?
I know who you're talking about, but I don't remember the name. But I know I've seen the quote. Yeah, often. Yes, absolutely. And
for those who not anyway, yeah.
So my argument is, how heartless and cruel and wicked can you be not to be involved in politics? And then people will say, well, I don't know, I'm just supposed to preach the gospel. Nothing in this stops you from preaching the gospel. The gospel is critical. Gospel is important. You should be preaching the gospel. That nothing stops you preaching the gospel. In fact, this allows you to spread the gospel to the people who are suffering. And they are going to be much more responsive to the suffering. And that's why if you can go free the slaves and preach them the gospel, you're going to get a lot further work than preaching the gospel to slave owners. Right? And so this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go into the culture and change the culture. And Jesus did that too. Jesus got involved with his politicians. He had politicians. People go, well, he didn't get involved in Rome. Well, he did. And I go through all this in the book. And people say, well, how did he get involved in politics? I said, well, guess what? Because they'll say, well, he never got involved in Roman politics. That's because he wasn't a Roman citizen. He was a citizen of Judea. Well, Judea had their own politics. The Romans governed Judea, but they didn't run it. Just like when we governed Iraq, we didn't run Iraq. You can't. It's just too much, right? So they had their own politicians. So the Jews had their own politician. It was called the Sanhedrin. This is where you find the senators, the representatives, and the judges were in the Sanhedrin. And they would sit around and they would pass laws, lesser laws, they couldn't violate the Torah, but anything below the Torah was their constitution. They could pass laws that were below the Torah and they could reinterpret the laws, right? And so Jesus was involved with these guys on a daily basis. And you go, well, who are these guys? Well, who were the members of the Sanhedrin? It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were Jesus' senators. And you see now that the whole gospel is full of Jesus talking to his senators and representatives. In fact, you can't even preach the gospel without quoting what Jesus said to Senator Nicodemus, his senator, a politician. He said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. The very first time we hear the gospel preached, it's to a politician. So Jesus was involved in politics all the time, and he was not just involved in theology things. He was involved with, actually, he says, you've forgotten mercy, faithfulness, and justice. Well, what is justice? Not God's justice.
Right.
It's their justice in their Sanhedrin. Mercy, not God's mercy, but their mercy. They were merciless to people. And then faithfulness. What was he talking about? He said, look, you have forgotten the original intent of the law. The law said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You've taken it and twisted around. Jesus is what we call a strict constructionist. He said, go back to the original intent of the law and see what it was. It was there to protect and help the humans, not for humans to be, stuck under the law.
You've got some really great connections there, Neil. I got to tell you, I'm really impressed by all these great connections that you have.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So it's all in the book. It's in the Jesus is Involved in Politics book.
Well, you also talk about active fatherhood and educational choice, which I think, again, when you bring a father into the home, and you start talking about education and you get fathers back in the home and getting involved in education, that nuclear family that it creates, you really begin to be able to address things like not only education, but lowering crime, increasing opportunity, getting rid of poverty, and you're able to bring values back to the home. And, let me say this, all too often we talk values and morals and Christian beliefs. There's a lot of people out there that go, ooh, I might believe in God, but ooh, that's a little bit too Christian for me. That's a little bit too like when you start saying Jesus, in an overzealous way, people really start to back off, and you start to shut away people. But what the way I was telling this, I don't know, at this past weekend in Phoenix, I was talking to a preacher. I said, I tend to do things more in a subtle way, because when you start telling people and just showing them, hey, this doesn't have to be as passionate as you might hear it from some people, but when you start doing it in a more subtle way, you really start to be able to work on policies, ideas, family in a real positive way, where people, because there's a lot of people that don't feel as passionate about Jesus, right?
Well, but see, here's the reality of this is because I play a trick with my audiences when I
Yeah.
come to speak. I ask them. I said, "Do you have constitutional rights?" And everybody raises their hands and they say, "Yeah." I said, "No, you don't. That was a trick question." And they go, "I don't." And I say, "I don't mean you lost them. I don't mean you had them and you lost them. I said you never had constitutional rights. Why? Because the Constitution doesn't give you any rights.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's a list of negative rights that the government cannot have. It says it's just a partial list of what the government cannot do. It's just to clarify the government cannot what? Abridge your freedom of speech, abridge your religion. It can, it can do all these things. It's a list of negative rights." I said, now, so where do your rights come from?
I
Well,
love how you say that, because because that's the truth. Everybody thinks this is the rights they give you. No, this is the rights that they cannot take from you.
Exactly. Well, they can't. Yeah, there's so many rights that they can't take, but this is, and it's, remember, the Bill of Rights is only an example of the rights they can't take from you. In fact, Madison was like afraid to have a Bill of Rights because he thought people would think those were all the rights. So people think that's the only rights there are, but there's so many other rights that you should have, and the government has no right to infringe on them. Now, what's interesting about this is, here's the thing, because all this goes back to, where do we get those rights from? Well, do I get the rights from, if I don't get the rights from the government, right? Because government will take them away. Do I get rights for myself? Can I give myself rights? No, because I don't have authority over you. I can't say, hey, you have, William, you have to treat me like emperor, because I don't have the right. I don't have any power over you. I don't have authority over you. So I can't give myself rights. Can we get rights from the masses? Well, we can't get rights from the masses, because if we get rights from the masses, then slavery was not wrong. Because the masses thought slavery was okay. In fact,
Exactly.
Every single society, every single civilization, except for the Jews, by the way, the Bible does not allow slavery the way we think about it. It did not allow slavery at all, in fact. But the only person, if the slaves didn't have rights, so all societies had no slaves. So when the slaves finally did get rights, did they get a new set of rights? Or wasn't it true that they always had rights, but they were being unjustly taken away from them?
Which makes your point about the Bill of Rights not being the rights that the government gives you. It's the rights they can't take away.
Exactly.
So in reverse of that, the black people already had rights, but the government was taking their rights away.
Exactly, right?
I love this.
Now here's why that's
and real quick before you start that is,
yeah.
And then like you talk about with if it was okay and democracy, and we had true democracy, then the population would be controlling our freedoms, because that's why we have a constitutional republic, because in a democracy, the majority can take away our rights as they deem fit.
And that's why the founding fathers called democracies mobocracies, right?
Called what?
They call them mobocracies.
Did not hear this. Explain that.
Yeah, they referred to democracies as mobocracies, and Madison said there's never been a democracy that did not murder itself. Right?
Okay, all right.
It's precisely for that reason. That's why they came up with the republic. Now, where did they come up with the idea for a republic? Exodus 18. Go read Exodus 18. That is the source of the republic. Somebody said, "Oh no, they got the republic from the Greek." I said, "No. While the Greeks were still scrubbing around in the woods, there was an entire society created on a republican form of government called the Israelites leaving Israel." And Moses talks about it, Exodus 17. That's where we get our idea for the republic. And you can go read that.
I'm glad you brought this up, Neil, because something I have not done on my podcast in a while. I used to do, and I will be doing more of it later here. I used to do bonus content, and I'd always look up, well, what did the founding fathers think about this? What did they think about that? And there's another book. Matter of fact, I got it right here. It is the Second Amendment Primer.
Oh.
And the Second Amendment Primer, when I studied that book, and then I studied the founding fathers, the Second Amendment Primer talks about how the founding fathers didn't just say we should be able to have the right to own guns to defend ourselves. Instead, they went back to 2,000 years of history, and they looked at civilizations that had the right to protect themselves. Our founding fathers didn't just say, "Hey, our rights are endowed by our Creator. Let's do this here in the present." They were very educated men that went back through pages and pages of history. They were studied and learned through England and back into times where we don't even realize how far they went back. For the Second Amendment alone, they went back 2 to 3,000 years.
Yep.
And they talk about societies that had the right to protect themselves through weapons. They even talked about societies that divided up into society where this part of society is going to be the agricultural part that grows our food. This part is going to be the governing part. This part is going to be the protector part. And they learned that the part that had of society that had the weapons eventually took over all the other parts.
Exactly.
So, so they learned all this. And the exact same thing with other parts of our history where they went back and said, we've got to go back into history and to also to this point, just like slavery. I looked up what did the founding fathers say about slavery, and a unique thing that I found was there was an article written that said our founding fathers were born into slavery. They didn't, and they weren't slaves themselves. That's not what this was saying. They were born into families that had been owning slaves for generations and generations. Our founding fathers didn't just get off the Mayflower, create a constitution. They were here for hundreds of years, their families. And so when you look at what they did, they knew that they couldn't end slavery right at that time, but they knew that within the Constitution that they could go back through history and, like we're talking about, and create a document that paved the way to the future.
And absolutely, because they knew that they needed the other colonies to fight the British. So without that,
exactly.
So they had to make a compromise. And Jefferson says himself, how long will a nation last that keeps slavery without God's judgment? And he knew it was coming, right? And he's a very controversial figure because he could have freed the slaves too, but he didn't.
Which goes to the Three-Fifths Clause, which was not because our founding fathers didn't regard the vote of black men, but also what also happened at that time that not many people realize is that the British were using slaves to fight against the colonists, or the people for the American Revolution.
Yeah, and so, but anyway, so coming back to it, so at the end of the point here is that I don't get my rights from the government. I don't get my rights from myself. I don't get my rights from the masses. So where do I get my rights from? The only person who can say that the slave owner has to treat the slave equally, that Hitler has to not kill the Jews and treat them equally, the only person who can say that you have to treat me equally and I have to treat you equally is somebody who has authority over all of us. So what is the only authority over every single human being? And that's what the Declaration of Independence says. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know the thing.
Yeah. You know the thing.
All men are created equal, endowed by not their government, not their society, not by themselves, but by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, here's the point I want to make very, very carefully. And it's very important. As I said, have traveled all over the world. I've become an expert in many religions. I understand Islam. I understand Judaism. I understand Shintoism. I've studied Hinduism. I've studied some of the tribal animistic religions. And I can tell you that there are no religions in the world where every person has equal rights except from the Judeo-Christian Bible.
Say that again.
There is no creator in any other religion that gives considers all man equal except for the Bible.
Really?
So you don't get in Islam, certainly not. You don't get in Hinduism, they have a caste system. You don't get in any of the ancient tribal religions. You don't get in Shintoism. You don't get in Buddhism, has no God. They're atheistic, so nobody can give you authority. Nobody has authority. And you don't get it from atheism. So there's only one religion.
What about Judaism?
Judaism has equality of man in it. Love your neighbor as yourself. But so Judaism and Christianity, but it's a Judeo-Christian principle. Okay. So everything comes from the Judeo-Christian principle. But the Bible says very clearly there is no slave or free, male or female. Jew or Gentile, they're all equal in God's sight. The idea that we have unalienable rights only comes from the Bible. And the minute you take the Bible out of any of this, you lose your authority for having unalienable rights. And that's why you see atheistic communist regimes, massive killing people anywhere. The value for life is not present in most cultures.
The value for power is greater than their God.
Yes. Well, also, but basically, their
desire to know power is greater than their desire to know God.
Yeah. So you have to have, if you're going to have a just society that believes in unalienable rights, it's got to be based on the Judeo-Christian God. It's as simple as that. You can't get out of that equation.
This is amazing. Once again, you're coming up with some nice, great information just from what I saw in your bio, but this is even more in depth. This is some really good stuff.
Thank you.
So, what religion do you practice, man?
My dad was an atheist. I was born in a Marxist family. My uncles were very famous Marxists. One of them was speaker for the World Council of Churches, which is a very Marxist. It's not really,
the World Council of Churches is Marxist.
Oh yeah, all the way. They're the biggest promotion of liberation theology. This was back in the 40s and 50s when he was speaker there. So I grew up in a very Marxist
home. Father?
Pardon me?
And that was your father?
No, that was my uncle.
Okay, what about your mother?
My father's brother. My dad was a communist and an atheist until I was about 5 or 6, and then he had an experience with Jesus, became a Christian. We grew up in a Christian home. My grandfather is a Christian. My great-grandfather was a Christian. In fact, we date our Christian heritage all the way back to St. Thomas in 51 AD. St. Thomas came to India.
So your father was actually, he strayed away for a little bit.
Yep, him and his generation strayed away. Most of them are still strayed, but many of them are believers. But my grandfather was a believer. And so was my great grandfather, and all the way back.
What about your mother? What about your mother?
My mother was always a believer. We always say, "Mom, why did you marry Dad? He was an atheist." She goes, "Well, he went to church," and we're like, "You wouldn't let us marry someone who just goes to church." Goes,
yeah, right, exactly. So your dad must have really loved your mother to go to church, but then again, God works in mysterious ways.
And my dad's a professor in physics. He's got multiple degrees. He's a man of faith and a man of science. So I grew up understanding that science and faith were like this. And so I teach something called apologetics, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is the defense of Christianity using defense of the truth of Christianity using science, logic, reason, archaeology, history, and philosophy.
I've never heard of it, actually, to be honest with you.
Go to noblindfaith.com, which is my website, my ministry website. noblindfaith.com, and I actually show how science proves that God exists. You can prove that God exists without using the Bible, using science. And then I show how the Bible that we have today is 99.8% positive to what they wrote 2,000 years ago, the New Testament. And then I also show how you can use a case that will stand up in a court of law that Jesus Christ really existed, really died, and really rose from the dead. Now, it's circumstantial evidence, but all the evidence points to a physical resurrection of Jesus, and then we go from there. We talk about.
And where is that?
Noblindfaith.com.
Yeah, that's. I can only fit so many websites. I've already got 2 websites. Have you been seeing me? I'm scrolling your websites down below there. Have you been seeing that? Yeah, so noblindfaith.com.
Yeah,
and also at Jesus is involved in politics.com. I've also got you at every BLM.com. So we're really rolling on that. So, well, this is pretty interesting. So you've moved around, like you said, Jamaica, Sudan, India, Ethiopia, Yemen, and that was when Yemen was under Sharia law?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In fact, they sort of still are in a way. So women were burqas, and there was no freedom. In fact, we had to leave Yemen. We were. What happened was my dad was a professor of physics in Sinai University. And one day, some of his old students came to visit him. We'd been there about 6 years, and his old students came. And he says, "You have 2 weeks to get out of the country." And he's like, "Why?" He says, "Well, apparently one of your coworkers committed suicide, and when they went into his bedroom, they found a Bible with your name on it. So we're going to buy you 2 weeks. After the mullahs are going to come after you." So we left that week, and then he followed a week later.
And what happened a week later?
And he followed a week later. He left the country a week later.
Oh, your dad waited. He pushed that 2 week envelope, didn't he?
Oh yeah, yeah. He basically was giving away everything. Gave away the car. Gave away, I mean, we were renting, so gave away all our furniture. I mean, they did buy him time. They said because some of his students had gotten involved, had been in politics, and were in the upper echelons of.
Because they knew that Jesus was involved in politics.
Yeah, well, they're Muslims. So.
What are the 4 businesses that you started? I'm just curious.
The first one I started was called Nuco Information System. That was Netflix before Netflix. In 1994, we were delivering video to the home. That company, I was able to raise $77 million in venture funding, but we didn't take off because we were dependent on PacBell to deliver our infrastructure. They never could. Mm-hmm. So we had all the video going to the homes in our trial homes, but PacBell didn't deploy to everybody. So that went under. I did another company called Bay Microsystems, which was a 40 gig ATM processor. It's all technical. And then I did Propulsion Networks, which is a 40 gig network processor. And then I did Tent Maker Systems, which was my consulting company.
And now you just do consulting or passionate about your community.
Yeah, so I do a bunch of things. I do consulting, I do teaching, I do preaching. I'm an ordained minister now. One of the pastors I was working with said, "I'm going to ordain you." So now I'm ordained.
And then also you got 16 patents.
Yeah, well, patents are kind of funny because I have to explain how I got patents. I'd be working on something, and the patent attorney would come over and says, "Have you patented that yet?" I'm like, "No." "Do you think you can patent?" He goes, "I can patent anything."
Although I did a show a couple months ago on how much our patent office is under fire, because when this is the other thing when we talk about all these different agendas, that these different organizations have, we forget to see how bureaucracy creeps into our government and grows, because all these different agendas that and the narratives that are being used to promote those agendas all end up creating bigger government and bureaucracies. And it's not so much our elected officials that we have to worry about, quote, stealing our freedoms, as much as the bureaucracies that do that. And the bureaucracies do it through, different rules and regulations that they are able to create without going through Congress.
So that's a law that has to be passed, that no law can be passed without a vote.
Exactly.
So no mandates, no recommendations. The only thing you're allowed to insist people do is a law. If you can recommend something, then you can't enforce it. You have to have a law. And the law, of course, has to be, it can't violate any of your rights.
But these bureaucracies are creating these rules, and I would say laws, these rules and regulations, without going through the congressional process, and are able to put things on us. Now, one of the things that happened that was done through Congress, which, by the way, was done with bipartisan support, which angers me a little bit, that our patent office, it has a presidential appointment. So the president of the United States can appoint the person who's the director of the patent office. And oftentimes, since Obama, this is passed during the Obama years under bipartisan support, that the president gets to appoint the director who gets to have full control over what patents can be, negated or passed. And usually, if you look at these past directors, they've been previous employees of Google and all these different big tech firms. And there's a lot of people that have patents that are found their patents got taken away or thrown out. And now Google steps in and is using that technology. The director of this patent office, gets full authority to say, "Oh, no. Google gets to use that patent." And now we're finding out there's a lot of people who lost a lot of money. I'm surmising it into very erratic.
I've heard of that. I haven't really looked into it, but
you need to look up USI. It's an interview I did with a group called USI, and when you hear what our patent office is doing to the small guy, it's really making a lot of our patents irrelevant. And then when you find out that countries like China are actually working harder to make their patents more secure, yet they're involved in our patent system to steal our technology, you wonder, why is the United States allowing this to happen?
Well, I always say if something sounds too stupid to be true, it's because they're doing it on purpose.
Good point. So I have a question: is What is Agent X anyway?
So Agent X, okay, so it's a book called Who's Agent X? This is actually the book that I mentioned. It's Proving God Exists Without Using the Bible.
Okay.
And I go through 7 points in there. I'll give you a quick overview here if we have time.
Absolutely. No, we got. Look, I'm enjoying this conversation, and we're getting lots of good information out. So we go as long as you have.
Okay, probably another 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. So the Agent X, the book Agent, Who's Agent X, which you can get on Amazon. If you look my name up on Amazon, you'll find it. You'll find all my books on there. But it's basically it was written for an atheistic friend of mine. And the friend basically said he didn't believe in God. And I said, well, okay, let me give you an argument why God exists. I said, but I won't use the Bible. So if I'm going to argue with an atheist, I'm not going to use the Bible because he doesn't accept the Bible as the word of God. So I understand that. So I'm not going to use that. So I said, let's use what you do agree with. He said, and the answer was he agrees with the Big Bang Theory. So we use the Big Bang Theory. Well, the Big Bang Theory actually says that everything came into existence at a certain point in time. And when it came into existence, 3 things came into existence at the same time: matter, time, and space. Sorry, matter, time, and energy. Right? Now, if you look at Einstein's equations, you'll realize that you can't have matter without time. You can't have time without energy, and you can't have energy without matter. They're all tied together. So, and they all came into existence simultaneously. This is the Big Bang of creation. Now, what does that mean? That means that whatever created the universe is not composed of matter, does not need energy, and is not constrained by time. Right? Now, if it's not composed of matter, it's not natural. It is above natural, supra above nature. It is supernatural, right? And if it's not composed of matter and it is not constrained by time, it is present in all time and all space, which we call that omnipresence.
Okay.
If it's powerful enough to create a universe, what do we call that? Omnipotence. Right? Now, if it is now, when the universe was created, there's something like 200 special constants, fine-tuned constants. The constant that changed 1 to the 40th, 40th percentile, or 1 to the power of 40. So 10 to the power of 40, 1 atom less or 1 atom more in the entire universe of one thing or the other, then the universe will collapse upon itself, or we wouldn't have heavy metals, and we had 1 less neutron or a certain percent less neutrons. Again, 10 to the minus 50 less neutrons, or 10 minus. That's like 1 in 0.00050 zeros.
Yeah, exactly.
0.1. Then we wouldn't have heavy metals, we wouldn't have stars, we wouldn't have planets. So these 200 constants had to be fine-tuned. So whatever created the universe knew enough to fine-tune the universe. We call that omniscience.
Okay.
Right? Now, without using the Bible, I've not referred to the Bible once, and I've just explained to you that why whatever created the universe is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and supernatural.
And I love the fact that it is not constrained by time.
Because it created time.
Always has been, always was, or always will be.
Right? So the book Who is Agent X? Great Christmas gift. You order on Amazon, you should be able to get it before Christmas. It is a short book. It's only about 150 pages, but the first 70 pages is the book. The other whatever pages, 60 pages or whatever, 150, 80 pages.
80 pages.
is all.
You're talking about all these big things and you didn't get 150 minus 70.
Well, you know what Einstein said, great minds should not be encumbered by simple arithmetic.
All right, I got
you. He had a little calculator, aide who would calculate all his numbers for him.
Yeah.
That's my excuse. He didn't have a calculator, so he had this aide that would do all his calculations for him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so basically the other 80 pages are all questions and objections I got from atheists over the years. Because remember, I grew up amongst atheists and Marxists,
right, exactly,
and Muslims and Hindus and all that. So I've had, and I work with them, many atheists. I'm out of Silicon Valley, so many atheists, and there are many atheists in Silicon Valley, and maybe functional atheists. They may not be, hardcore atheists. There are hardcore atheists too. And I would have these discussions at lunch every day, and I would say, "What about this? What about this?" And they give me an objection, and I would answer it and say, "Oh, okay, what about this?" So a lot of those pages are just the objections that I got in the book. So that's what Agent X is. And so the question is, who is Agent X? As we go through this little thing, we say, we are going to discover what created the universe. I don't want to say God created the universe. We're going to say some agent created the universe. We'll call it Agent X. And that's how the book starts.
I love this. You talk about, as I was reading some of your bio, you talk about something called the Value Advocacy.
Council.
Um,
Yeah.
what is that? What is that
So the
short
Values
for?
Advocacy Council was formed in 2003, not by me, by two gentlemen. They wanted to bring Christian pastors to get more involved politically. Right. And so what happened, though, is the pastors didn't get involved. So they started focusing on getting Christians involved. And we were meeting like 50 people, 40 people. And then when COVID hit, we grew to some of our meetings have 1,800 people in our meetings. So we have these huge mass. In fact, we have one on January 14th where we have the first ever transgender person from the 1980s who has reversed his gender. So back in the 1980s, there was a gentleman named Walt Hare who became Lisa Hare. I believe he became Lisa. And then he realized how that was destroying his life, and he converted back. And so he's going to come and talk about how destructive the transgender movement is. And he's going to talk about, and he'll do a Q&A and everything. So that's the 14th. And then on February 18th, we have Dr. Simone Gold, who, she just got out of, not just, but she was out of prison for 60 days, and she's been a frequent guest. And usually when she comes, people come flock there. So you go to vac.org, here's another website.
Yeah, right.
You can actually register for the live stream, or you can come. If you're in San Jose, you can come attend. All of our events are usually free. You just need, we ask for a donation.
Yeah, he'll pay for the event center.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. So the VAC sounds like it's opposite of that other organization we talked about a little earlier, which was the World Christian Organization.
The World Council of Churches.
World Council of Churches, which you said is a very Marxist organization instead.
Yes. So the VAC is not a group of churches. We don't call it churches, but it's mainly composed of Christians. Yes.
So who started the VAC again?
So it was a pastor, a friend of mine named David Sawkins. Yeah.
And y'all have grown that to be, like you said, from nothing up to 1,800 people.
Yeah, in a good day. But our average attendance can be anywhere from 500 to 1,800. Like Charlie Kirk has come and spoken for us.
Really?
Yeah, a couple of times actually. He's come.
I didn't realize how Christian. I mean, like I know he was Christian, but I love the fact that one of the things he talked about this past weekend at American Fest was he said, look, go out, get married, have kids, have a family.
Yeah.
And it's just very simple, and it's a very Christian thing to do, but it's not going, Jesus tells you to do this. And I say that not to be sarcastic, but I find that sometimes very spiritual people can be very powerful and reach a lot of people in some ways, but I'm a very subtle person.
Yeah.
I like bringing on people that can talk about it in such a way that you go, because some people don't want to feel like they have to like say it like that to be as spiritual, but they want to feel it inside. And that's why I feel like people like you that just have facts and some of the things that you've talked about are the best way to bring people closer to their spiritual self, and know that you don't have to be overzealous to be able to realize that our universe is being governed by a higher power, or that our Constitution was inspired by our Creator to be able to believe and follow a good life and live a good life. And that's some of the things that I've gotten from you that I feel very inspired about some of the things you've said.
Well, thank you.
So is there anything else that we're forgetting? I mean, I know that we're about to wrap up here in a few minutes, but is there anything else that you feel is important to bring up that you use to inspire other people?
Well, so here's what I used to invite. A lot of people are now thinking, oh, look, America's going downhill. We're going to be destroyed. We're overwhelmed. The battle is lost, and Jesus is coming soon. Well, first of all, don't use Jesus is coming soon as an excuse, because what if John Newton, they thought Jesus was coming soon from 70 AD, right? They thought
exactly
after the temple was destroyed, they're like, okay, Jesus is coming back now, right? And so you can't use that. What if John Newton had said, well, Jesus is coming soon, we're going to let the slaves be slaves, right? We still have slaves today, right? You've got to start, you got to get a fight. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we think, oh, we're such a minority in America. Christians and believers, conservatives, such a minority in America. There's no way we can win this battle. So let me give you a statistic. If I were to say only 17% of the country goes to church, and a woman in New York is more likely to be pregnant out of wedlock than to attend a church. What decade do you think I'm talking about?
Today?
1776.
Really?
1776, less than 17% of the population attended church. A woman in New York was 33% likely to be pregnant out of wedlock. Now, of course,
Unbelievable.
remember, New York was the Wild West back then, right?
Yes, I had no idea.
So, and here we are, we're whining and moaning that we're a small minority. All the latest statistics say we're at least 4% of the United States. Look, let's be honest. You know, 3% of the gay community managed to change all our laws.
Right, exactly.
So
Right.
here we are whining and moaning and saying we can't do it. We just need to get out there. We need to get.
But let's also not forget that it was still what I've heard the 3%ers are the reason where they got 3% from. But also, it was less than 10% of our population wanted to stay with the royal crown.
Yes, they did.
You know,
Yeah.
they didn't want America to be independent. They didn't want a constitution, and so it was less than it was a minority of our population that actually wanted to be free of England.
And
look where we are today.
And remember, England is the most powerful empire that has ever existed in the history of the world. The sun never set on the English empire.
Say that again.
The sun never set on the English empire because they were so big that the sun was always shining on somewhere in the English empire.
Ah, okay, there you go. I never thought it didn't hit me right off. I do remember hearing that a long time ago.
Yeah, so we took on the greatest empire in the history of the world. They were greater than the Romans. They were greater than the Nazis for sure. They were greater than the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and you can go all the way back, greater than the Egyptians. We took on the greatest empire history has ever known, and we won with 17% of the population who believed in the cause or believed in Christianity.
You're making me think that there's more than one example. We always hear people say, that most democracies only last, 200 years or 250 years, whatever it is. The United States is at 250 years. Well, a couple points come to my mind, and I'll thank you for these thoughts. One, England has been around for how long?
Well, they weren't a democracy until recently, yeah.
But exactly, but still, and the United States isn't really a democracy.
No, we're not. We're a republic.
The people are saying, "Oh, most democracies over the last 200 years, and we're 250 or whatever." We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic.
And that's exactly why the founding fathers didn't want us to be a democracy, because they said democracies murder themselves.
Exactly, because the will of the people. Going back to those less than 3% of the United States that wanted to be free of England, had democracy ruled, we'd still be, we'd have castles and, and lords and
right?
kings and queens,
So and that set up all the other independence movements. I mean, India got its independence, Sudan got its independence, Ghana got its independence from the British, all in the similar vein. Right. So, I mean, they didn't have to fight them, though. That was the advantage of it. Right. Although India did have a lot of battles in some sense. But I guess my point being that, look, let's not be defeatists. Here's how we get to change. We need every year, 40 million Christians don't vote. 40 million Christians don't vote. Yeah. And about the 20 million who do vote, and this is, this is statistically a number I got. And so that means that we only need to get about 10 million or 15 million more people out there to vote for godly values, and we'll win every election in every state. And if we start infiltrating all the elections office, the registrar of voters, we can make sure that you don't fix the registrar of voters by complaining about blaming the machine. You fix it by getting in and taking over the registrar of voters.
Well, you started out this interview speaking my language, on changing laws that affect our government programs, that keep people addicted to government programs. Right. And we're ending this podcast almost with another thing at my own heart, which is, the voting machines, but not the fact that we have to speculate whether the voting machines are accurate or not, which I'm not going to go there because a lot of my listeners have hard time hearing that. But what I have been saying is we got to get more people involved in our registrar of voters, because it is our registrations that are inaccurate that are being used for ballot harvesting. Yep, and whether it's being used by the machines or not, the reality is there's a lot of laws, both federal and state, that have our Secretary of State's hands tied at being able whether they can purge voting rolls or
All
not.
that. Yep. So we got
And
to
if
change all that.
we get more people involved in the registration process in a positive way, forgetting about the election machines, whether they're accurate or not, and getting involved in making our registrar of voters records more accurate.
Amen.
And that I love that you brought that up,
So
Neil.
yeah, so that would be my final say is that look, we can win this battle. We just need to get more churches involved. And the way to do it is go to our website, go to everyblm.com, go to resources. There's a brochure, Should Christians Be Involved in Politics? Print it out, hand it to your pastor. In fact, print it out and put one on every car in your church.
Yeah.
We give you full permission to print it. And it basically talks about why Christians, how it's unloving and mean-spirited and cruel not to be involved in politics.
I love that. Neil, I got to tell you, this has been one of my favorite interviews in quite some time.
Thank you.
And I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've really enjoyed, it's even though we've talked politics, we've talked it in a very non-narrative way, a nonpartisan way.
Oh, I did blame the Democrats though for a bit there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, look, you got to blame the policy where the policy came from.
Yes.
And look, it's like, look, early on, I talked about how the Republicans stole the word conservative values.
Yeah.
And I blame the Republicans for stealing the word conservative, because conservative knows no party. There are Democrats who are more conservative than some of our Republican friends,
right.
And if we talk about where the problems are and we find ways to unite people and we find ways to solve problems, we're going to fix our community and save our country in a lot of the ways that you talked about tonight.
Amen.
Neil, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, William. I appreciate being on here.
When I end the podcast, I'm going to talk to you for just a minute off camera.
Sounds
but
good.
Once again, thank you very much. Everybody else, please share this interview. It's going to be on Rumble, Cloud Hub. If you find it in one place, you'll find another. If you haven't known about the podcast, the audio for this will be on every podcast app, all the major podcast apps at that. And catch me on Facebook, Twitter, Rumble at William Wallace for America. Thank you so much, and y'all have a great night.